My guest today is author Thomas E. Patterson. The book, American Populist, Huey Long of Louisiana. Now, sir, thank you for joining me. Before we get started, I have to call you out for being a Star Wars fan.
Don't call me out. I'm innocent.
2 chapters in this book referencing Empire Strikes Back. So I saw the theme. I thought I'd call it out.
You bet. Anything to draw the listener in, right? That's what you need to do these days.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
I want to dive right into this book. First off, the inclination is to ask you what your motivation was for writing this.
Yeah.
It's quite obvious the parallels between Huey Long and the current president and his playbook, re the media, and the way he handles not just the press, but the people.
You're absolutely correct on that. And that was coincidental because I started writing the book and researching it in 2013 and 2014. It just took me much longer than I thought it would take to get the book down. But there's clearly similarities. I believe that either Donald Trump himself or someone close to him has read an awful lot about Huey Long. The similarities are just too coincidental to think otherwise. If you look at their slogan, Huey's slogan was "Every man a king." Trump's slogan is "Make America Great Again." You look at Trump's penchant for demeaning nicknames to opponents, Crooked Hillary, Lion Ted Cruz, and so forth. Huey Long did that also. He called the mayor of New Orleans Turkey Head Walmsley and called another unfortunate lawyer Whistlebritches Writer. And those are devastating nicknames for his political opponents at the time. He also was willing to double down on violation of norms, and Donald Trump does that as well. And then he also had a blizzard of proposals or ideas or rumors or thoughts that dominated the news media of his day. And you would have one controversy on one day would get buried by the next controversy that followed it. And that meant that a lot of the critical stories about Huey and about Trump get buried because they've gone on to new and noteworthy, newsworthy stories. So you can see the parallels in how they manage the media. Look at how they denounce the media. To Huey, the word lion newspapers was one word. And Trump obviously has, the fake news. And so the parallels are extraordinary, even though they're really going towards different ends. Huey wants tax breaks for the wealthy, and Huey was working for the 99%. Huey was almost a combination of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump with an extra dash of legal brilliance thrown in.
Well, in many ways, if you talk about the horseshoe theory, then you wind up with 2 very similar political identities in Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump.
I have talked to people who say that their favorite politician is, say, Donald Trump, and their second favorite politician is Bernie Sanders. And you think, wow, how can that be? But I think they are both authentic, and they both say what they believe, and they don't need a bunch of advisors to tell them what to say. So I think it is understandable. And I also think, but I don't know if anybody agrees with me, I also think that it might be a mistake to look at politics in the 2-dimensional realm of left and right. It might be more accurate to describe it as a sphere, and there are sometimes that the politics of the left and the politics of the right kind of merge together. If you remember, you're probably too young to remember NAFTA in 1994, where you had Ross Perot, a businessman, opposed to it. You had Patrick Buchanan, an America First right-wing commentator, against it. And you had Richard Gephardt, a union devotee, also against it. And it's interesting that both members of the left and the right came together to oppose NAFTA, in addition to the businessman Ross Perot.
Well, this is one of the takeaways from your book. You could almost wipe out the names of the political parties, and it wouldn't affect any of the book or any of the story, I should say, because Huey Long was constantly vilifying his own party. Yes. And he was walking the line between fascism and populism. Would you agree?
Well, I think fascism is a difficult label. It's been pinned to him by many commentators, and it's an easy label to pin to him. But, he never advocated foreign conquests. He never attacked minority groups. He had the Jewish and Italian people in New Orleans as part of his political organization, and they were ostracized from New Orleans society otherwise. So it's hard to pin the label of fascism on him. But you might have better luck with the term majoritarian tyranny. He represented the majority of Louisianans, and people who were opposed to what the majority will was at that time did suffer. But they suffered in the service of him providing the political benefits that he had promised in the elections that preceded him. And so, the people voted for getting free school books for their children, and school enrollment jumped 20%. People voted for getting concrete highways instead of gravel highways so that they could get their farm products to market and travel to other cities. People supported his expansion of LSU because they wanted their kids to be able to go to college. People supported his creation of the LSU Medical School because that doubled the South's supply of doctors, because people that couldn't afford to go to the only medical school at the time at Tulane suddenly had a place to go. And he made tuition cheap so that college education, the opportunity for that was a reality. So primarily the idea of this that he was a tyrant. I mean, it took him 17 years to become preeminent in Louisiana, and during that time he endured electoral defeats. He endured impeachment. He endured legislative defeats, and then finally the opposition wouldn't bend. And so ultimately he broke it. And but even his takeover of local governments, which is usually the theory advanced for why he was dictatorial, was authorized by law at the time. The law was Dillon's rule. Municipalities were creatures of the state government, and absent a home rule provision in the state constitutions, the Louisiana legislature and many other legislatures in other states were allowed to take over or decide what municipalities could do and what they could not do.
Tyranny is a great word, but it reminds me, going back to your sphere comment, that politics exists in the gray. It is really only the voter side that plays in the party pool. Tyranny is a great word because it's in the eye of the beholder. If you're somebody that voted for paving roads and you voted for free books and you voted for cutting spending, government efficiency, then you want the iron fist because it's in your favor. But if somebody's using it in their own self-interest, and in many ways they all do it, doesn't excuse it, but in many ways going through this, it seems to me that even as this man is presenting himself as a populist, as a man of the people, it's all in his own best interest. And even down to the way that he used the opportunity with Hattie Caraway to get back at Senator Robertson. That's not about the people. That's about pure politics.
Well, I see your point that he was interested in striking a blow at Joe Robinson and outflanking him.
Was it Robertson or Robinson?
Robinson, excuse me, if I misspoke. Joe Robinson.
No. I just want to make sure I have it right, but my handwriting's, I look like I'm writing scripts over here.
Well, welcome to the handwriting club.
Carry on, sir.
Yeah. No, Joe Robinson was his party's leader in the Senate, and Huey had opposed him in 1932 because he wanted to impose higher taxes on the wealthy, and Robinson did not. And he resigned all his committee chairmanships that Robinson had appointed him to in protest for that. And then he tried to outflank Robinson, number one, by supporting Franklin Roosevelt for the presidential nomination. Robinson stayed neutral. And so Huey was considered indispensable in Roosevelt's nomination at the Chicago Convention of 1932. And then he supported Hattie Caraway, a woman senator who was serving the rest of her husband's unexpired term. And no woman in the United States had been elected to a full 6-year Senate term at that time. But his reasons for supporting Hattie Caraway had that political component, getting back at Joe Robinson in his home state, no question about that. But she had also voted for his legislation and resolutions to tax the wealthy at a higher rate. So his politics, in my view, was fundamentally ideological. And when he later opposed Roosevelt's programs in 1933, I say Roosevelt's programs advisedly, because he didn't oppose Roosevelt the man. He still said he supported him. But he opposed a cut to veterans' benefits in 1933 that Roosevelt proposed, and he supported expanding the benefits to protect the banks and rejuvenate the banks that had closed when Roosevelt was inaugurated by asking that the protection be extended to state banks, which Roosevelt had not included in his legislation. And he also supported the insurance of bank deposits, which is a fundamental feature of the security that we feel in banking in the United States today. And Roosevelt's administration opposed it. It was passed basically by Huey and other progressive senators who forced that piece of legislation down his throat. So, yes, he played the political game. Anybody that's going to survive in politics is going to play that game, and they have to play it successfully or they're going to get defeated. I mean, if Huey had won the election and then the legislature had voted down his program, he would have been defeated the next time he ran. So he played politics. He played it hard, and he played it to win. But he also had this ideological component that I think most people have missed when they examine Huey. They say, oh, he's a demagogue, or oh, he was dangerous, or oh, he was a dictator. He had a program. He was the most consistent politician in the United States. He advocated taxing the wealthy in 1918 and 1919 in public letters to the editor, in letters he wrote to Senator Albert Beveridge in 1922, in a speech he gave in the middle of Calvin Coolidge's administration in 1925, and then again when he got to the Senate in 1932, and throughout his life before he was assassinated in 1935.
Consistency, and I don't want to get on a whole Trump tangent just yet, but consistency is such an interesting thing to bring up, because it is very rare in a politician's history that they can be proven to be consistent. And Donald Trump is one of the most consistent politicians in our history. And it's kind of fascinating because that's enough for some people.
And when you say he's been consistent, are you referring to like his emphasis on trade policy?
Yeah, his trade policy. I mean, you go back to these interviews of him in the 80s, and a lot of what he is practicing today is coming from, whether it's his mouth or Roy Cohn or anybody else's. But it's the notion of consistency, and I just wonder where you think that weighs in with populism, because it's almost like the message becomes secondary as long as your authenticity shines through.
Oh, I think that's an interesting observation. I would point out that in around 1999, Trump proposed something like a 14.5% tax on the extremely wealthy, and he thought it would pay off the deficit completely. Now, he has backed off that policy or that proposal entirely because it's anathema to the people who support him today. And I don't know whether Trump is totally consistent with respect to tariffs. I'm not sure what the tariffs are from one day to the next. But but I think your point is more fundamental and has a good basis. In my view, populism, whether they articulate it or not, depends upon whether we're going to advance or whether the American dream is going to be threatened. And so I think Trump says adverse trade policies and immigration or uncontrolled immigration threaten the American dream. Even though he hasn't said it in those particular words, I think that's what populism is. And Huey Long thought that the concentration of wealth, which is the same thing Bernie Sanders rails against, and the failure to tax the wealthy at a fair rate is what threatens the American dream. In fact, Huey's first major speech in the United States Senate in 1932 was the doom of the American dream. And he was heavily influenced by the historian John Truslow Adams, who is the historian who first coined the term the American dream. So in my view, then, the populist politicians, whether they say it or not, they are articulating the American dream, and they're pointing out what they think threatens that American dream or the things that would prevent that American dream from being advanced. So in that respect, I think that Trump is consistent in that he is articulating his vision of the American dream, making America great again, and doing so by expelling foreigners and raising tariffs and doing these other things, which, I have problems with a lot of that. Although I tell you, Huey Long was a tariff Democrat. So that was fairly unusual at the time.
It's all in the eye of the beholder. Consistent doesn't mean correct unless you voted for it.
Well,
so, but to that idea, because it's kind of interesting. A guy like Huey Long is literally a kingpin, okay, and by the time you get to the Senate, you're now the little fish, and it doesn't matter that you're the little fish. You're now the very thing you railed against. So even though he's there railing against his contemporaries, it's like it's the natural arc, which I guess you could apply to anything in life, but you become the very thing when you succeed that you were once railing against. So how does, and I guess it's not just a question based off of Huey Long, but how in politics is that, I know how it's allowed, but how is that digested from the public? Because, you look at somebody like a Trump or like a Huey Long and you go, your entire career was spent, or up until a point, railing against the very thing you become. And then at a certain point, you have to inherit all of the things you once railed against. And I don't understand how people accept that. People are very short, they have very short attention spans, very short memories, and it's very easy to forget.
Well, there's a couple of ideas there that we can try to unpack, or I can do the best I can at it.
Please.
A.J. Liebling, the old New Yorker writer, wrote a book about Huey's brother who followed Huey in Louisiana politics. And he said that Huey was considered a tyrant, but he said maybe we just came in at the end of the story. We missed the point where the giants were oppressing Huey's people, and we just come in when Huey was oppressing the giants who would previously oppress the common people.
Lack of context.
Yes. So so there's that kind of, you become what you rail against, I suppose. And in revolution theory, you can see that happens. Hey, let's don't get fooled again, that kind of thing. But let's look at Huey in the United States Senate, because I don't think he ever became an establishment member of the United States Senate. And I don't think people consider that Bernie Sanders has become an oligarch. So he's been able to maintain his position that he's against oligarchy even while he's a member of the United States Senate, I think. Now, let's look at Huey and tell me if you think this resembles anything today. When Huey goes to the Senate for the first time in 1932, we were in the third year of the Great Depression. Hoover was president. Joe Robinson was the minority leader of the Democrats in the Senate. And Huey goes there expecting to fight for the common people. And he gets there to Washington, D.C., and after about a week he says, the Democrats here are like whipped roosters getting pecked on the head, bleeding, and taking it. They are afflicted with political paralysis. And he said he was disgusted. He thought Washington was the farthest from the American population that he had ever seen. It's the farthest place away from America that you could get. Now, tell me that doesn't ring a bell with the Democrats today. They just seem to be sitting there bleeding and taking it as Trump inflicts all this misery upon them, all these victories, some of which you've pointed out at some cost to criticism to you when you point out that Trump has some victory. You can't deny it. He's had some victories. But the Democrats, what are they doing? What is the competing program? Even Bernie Sanders, what's his remedy for minimizing or destroying the oligarchy? What is it?
I don't think he has one because I think he's part of it, to your point.
Really? Really?
What has Bernie Sanders accomplished? Bernie Sanders is a Democrat.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the way that the Democrats use the independent party as a vessel to circumvent anything that they need to circumvent, and you see that with Cuomo, But Bernie Sanders is a lifelong Democrat, and again, this goes back to my point. It's like how do people? I understand how consumers digest things incorrectly, so they're manipulated by it. But I look at it and go, I don't understand how people don't see right through it. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders are cut from the same coin.
So what's the remedy?
Well, I think that the remedy, this is not a rational answer, but I'm going to give it to you anyway, is a hard reboot of the system. And I think that we need multiple parties to fragment what would be a three-party system, because I don't think that would work.
Well, that's interesting. The two-party system has been around for so long, and generally third-party challengers haven't succeeded. Not even Teddy Roosevelt, a pretty charismatic and capable politician. There was also a third party in 1924 by Robert La Follette, which took 5 million votes, which was a lot of votes at the time. And, of course, Ross Perot probably threw the election of Bill Clinton in 1992. I don't know whether fragmented parties or more parties is the answer, because I don't know that European democracies with the fragmented party system are functioning any better than we are. What I would suggest as a remedy for Bernie Sanders or anybody else is I don't think becoming a senator makes you an oligarch. But I think if you don't propose a realistic solution to deal with the problems that we face, then I think you do become part of the problem. And I don't know what something, look at the tradition, at least from my worm's eye view, and I'm not a current political commentator, so maybe I'm wrong, but my worm's eye view, it seems to me that every time we get into a presidential race, all of a sudden these candidates come up with their programs. And I'm thinking, well, you've been in the Senate for 2 terms, 3 terms, whatever. Have you proposed this before? And often they have not. Or if they have proposed it, they haven't publicized it and stumped for it. And I think Huey was kind of a unique politician because he set forth what his ideas were before the election cycle began. So he, in other words, introduced his resolution to tax the wealthy at a heavier rate in 1932. He fought for it in 1933. He proposed it again and formulated societies that spread throughout the United States to do it and to be a pressure point for this proposal in 1934. And people said he was preparing to run for president in 1936. But he made his proposals 2 years at least before he even ran for president. And I don't see that model being followed by Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, unless I'm misinformed somehow.
Well, he certainly was playing a long game. I mean, he obviously was a very ambitious man. And it seems like most guys like this, they're sprinting and they never make it all the way through because they're sprinting. I mean, the idea that the strategy that he originally was going to implement to become president would have been at the detriment of the country if it actually would have worked. And I'll let you read that to the viewer because it's really fascinating. I mean, again, the parallels are bright and they're right there. But to your point, you started writing this ahead of time, but it's not just relegated to Trump. It's not just relegated to Trump. I think that one of the things I want to point out really quick is that his first victory was a marginal victory.
Oh, yeah.
So that goes back to the idea of
votes for
how many?
635 vote victory for a position that represented 1/3 of the state on what was then called the Railroad Commission. Now it's called the Public Service Commission. Yeah.
And didn't he have to squeeze everybody else out to even win?
He had made deals with the other candidates that if he was defeated, he'd support them, and if they were defeated, they would support him. So he lost the initial election to the incumbent by, I forget, over 1,000 votes. But then in the runoff election that was necessitated because no one got a majority, he picked up the votes from the defeated candidates and squeaked by to a 635 vote victory.
It's already an old boys club.
Well,
it is.
He was helped by, almost as soon as he got elected, Standard Oil and some other big oil companies froze out the independent oil drillers in the area near Shreveport. And so he was able to start an agitation to allow the pipelines of the oil companies to be used as common carriers. And so he started off his tenure on the Railroad Commission with a bang, with an issue that was extremely popular and where he took the side of the independent oil drillers, all capitalists, but the underdogs.
It's fascinating to think about the reoccurring patterns in our politics, because the way that this man worked the media, for lack of a better word, not that there was much media back then, the way that he stumped. This is the same messaging that we're looking at today. This, again, to bring it back to Trump, because it's kind of hard not to. And I look at what he was doing when he was stumping for Hattie Caraway and all of that, and you're like, man, that is a level of drive that borders on insanity. And you almost go, is that a prerequisite? Like, is the narcissism and the hyper focus and the self-interest almost part of the bundle that comes with wanting to be a leader? In other words, can you really be effective if you don't have some of those driving factors?
Well, that's a great question. And one of the things that I left open in the book is the psychology of Huey. I just didn't feel like I had enough information or enough expertise to comment on the psychology of it. There's no question that he had a great psychological drive. And I think, at least as an armchair psychologist, you can say anybody who grew up as he grew up in the little town of Winfield, Louisiana, and faced the snurs and the slickers of the Louisiana oligarchy was going to have some kind of resentment that could produce a psychological drive. And he certainly had the intelligence to capitalize on that, unlike most people. And so he customarily got 4 hours of sleep every night. And then kind of caught up on the weekends, and people couldn't follow him on his campaigns because he worked till 1 a.m. and then got up at 6 a.m. and started campaigning again. And the Hattie Caraway campaign, he gave 3 to 5 hour long speeches every day for a week. Now, he was exhausted at the end of that week. He said he was so tired he could hardly pick up his fork, but he did it, and he elected her. If you think about it, who would have thought that the first woman elected to the United States Senate for a full 6-year term would be from Arkansas? But he did that, and he had a tremendous. Let's segue into this media, because I think you're touching on a key point, if you don't mind.
Please.
Huey Long had to neutralize the effect of the major New Orleans press and the Baton Rouge press. And he did that in a variety of ways. He did it by his speech making, because he traveled all over the state making speeches, and they were long speeches and rebutted the accusations that were made against him and advanced his program. Then he had a system of circulars where he'd write a memo, and he had off-duty state policemen and his volunteer workers, and he could write a circular and have it on everybody's mailbox or front porch the next day. And so he had an independent means of getting what he considered to be the truth out, wholly apart from the newspaper editorials and so forth. Then he ultimately started his own newspaper in Louisiana called the Louisiana Progress, and that was a way for him to get the word out. And then finally, radio was a new medium at the time, and he became one of its most expert users, and he recognized its potential right away. And if you think about radio at the time, it provided an opportunity for him to reach the voters directly without the sometimes censoring effect of the big city press or the rich people's press. And so therefore he was able to get those people on his mailing list, and then he would continue to issue them circulars through the mails and otherwise, and he was able to keep that support for his program. And then when you look at his national appeal, he ended up starting what he called the American Progress, and another newspaper, and he used the radio almost as frequently as Franklin Roosevelt did to try to get people to sign up for his Share Our Wealth program. And that movement was announced in February of 1934. And by the time he died in September of 1935, there were an estimated 9 million members of the Share Our Wealth Society, people who had written in and said they agreed with his program and signed up to be a charter member of the Share Our Wealth Society. And that's at a time when maybe 20 million votes could conceivably carry a presidential election. So just imagine. They had at least one member in every county of every state, according to one of his supporters. So it's amazing that he was able to appreciate the media and take steps to overcome the opposition media and develop his own communication strategies. Now, let's look at Trump. Trump has an unrivaled mastery of television from his time as the apprentice. I mean, I look at some of these cabinet machinations and the people he's appointed to his cabinet, and I think, my God, this is just like an apprentice. This is just like a reality TV show. So some of these people are just clowns.
Even just the posturing of the meetings looks like the apprentice finale, like the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Looks like the boardroom.
Yeah. And then he also there's also the new media of Twitter or Truth Social, whatever it is he's calling it, and that allows him or anybody else to reach the voters directly without any censorship, without any mediating effect of the major television networks. And I think that at the time of Huey, I think the newspapers didn't realize that their influence was being undercut by radio orators. And I think that CBS, NBC, and ABC, maybe they don't realize that their influence has been undercut by the fact that, well, A, Fox News, but B, Trump is able to reach the voters directly through X and Twitter and these other kinds of social media.
And then use those same tools to, again, flood the zone.
Yes.
So it's a double-edged sword because it's great for the messaging and it's great for the spread of misinformation because the fact check never gets, I was having this conversation the other day, the fact check never gets as many impressions as the lie.
There was an opponent of Huey who said that Huey lied all the time. That's what he said. And I don't agree with him. I think Huey was actually very honest with the voters. But let's take it for how he said it. And he said that the number of Huey's lies were like taking a pillowcase up to the Empire State Building and opening up the pillow and watching all the feathers. You couldn't rebut them all. You couldn't even keep track of them all. And therefore, it was impossible to compete with them. But if you look at Trump today, he has that same quality. He gives more interviews, I think, than any other modern president that I'm aware of. And I've lived through Kennedy's domination of the media through his press conferences. Ronald Reagan was a great communicator. Bill Clinton was considered a great communicator. Barack Obama was considered a great speaker. But they didn't dominate the media every day, morning, noon, and night, the way Trump does. And we may be looking towards a new conception of the presidency where all you do is communicate. I mean, the old presidents might spend 3 hours reading a briefing paper. I don't think Trump spends 3 hours reading a briefing paper. I think he issues his orders through Twitter and rocks and rolls.
You beat me to it. I wonder how much of this has to do. I saw a stat a few weeks back that the average American is operating at an 8th grade reading level. And yes, Barack Obama was a great orator, but it relied on speech writers and presentation.
Yes.
Trump, you can say he's an effective communicator, but he's a horrible speaker. And I just wonder if it's the dumbing down of our culture that makes his messaging work, because he's not he's not a solid speaker. Even when he's on the teleprompter, he breaks the wall and starts talking to the speechwriter, which I think is hilarious. By the way, I think it's hilarious. Yeah. And I don't like what he's saying, but I still crack up because he's like arguing with the speechwriter and it's demented.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's authentic. It is authentic,
but that's just, so that goes back to the quality of customer, right?
I think, you've got a couple of points there, which are great. Number one, it goes to authenticity, right? If he's thinking something, he's saying it. I mean, and you get it warts and all. I mean, mistakes, lies, misrepresentations, stories, hallucinations, whatever you want to call it, you're getting it. It's like everybody that has an extended family probably has somebody like that, right? And you're right that there is a tendency for some speechwriters to overestimate the grade levels of their audience. Huey theory of writing these circulars that he wrote was to write it at a level of a 6-year-old child. A 6-year-old child could understand it. Then he thought it was a great circular. And but he also appreciated some of the techniques that advertisers appreciate. He was very specific. He didn't say, I'm going to improve education. He said, I'm going to give your children free school books. I mean, that's a level of specificity that I think is important when you're trying to cut through the clutter of competing messages. And there's one more point on this that isn't in the book, but so around 2016 or maybe 2017, I was driving back from somewhere in Chicago, and I was flipping the radio channels, and it came on Kanye West was being interviewed by a radio host, and he said that Barack Obama was a beautiful speaker, a terrific speaker. He really appreciated the flow of language and so on and so on. But he said, sometimes I wonder what he's actually said. And he said, Donald Trump, when he speaks, I always know what he said. And I thought that was a fairly intelligent remark, and I think it dovetails with what you're saying. And to that extent, I agree with you. I think that Obama made a terrible mistake after he passed Obamacare legislation, and the Republicans who opposed it, predicted all kinds of doom. We were going to lose 2 million jobs, the prices were going to rise, there wasn't going to be health care available, and blah, 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 blah. And I fault Obama, from my worm's eye view, for not at those midterm elections going out and beating the drum and pointing out that none of those terrible things have happened. He could have quoted the Republican senators who predicted doom and gloom and then showed the actual statistics of what happened. And so he lost control of the Congress in those midterm elections. And I think he could have tried to do more to prevent that with this ideological-based politics. Look, I have this idea. And you look at now, the one thing the Trump voters don't want to eliminate is the Affordable Care Act, which some of them don't realize is Obamacare.
Well, there's a lot of things Trump says that Obama said, but because it comes out of Trump's mouth, they cheer him on. But it's the messenger.
Yes, I think I think there is a tremendous amount of unrealized hypocrisy among voters, probably of both parties, but you see it most extensively in the Trump supporters, where
I'll just say it, as controversial as a statement as this may be, and I don't care. I worked on Barack Obama's first campaign as a volunteer field organizer. I think he was so afraid the whole way through, but maybe even more so after healthcare. Obamacare is such a weird term. But so I think he was afraid of being the angry black man and being vilified through the media that way. And I actually think that would have been more authentic, like to get out there and to not to yell and scream,
right,
but to have the same level of frustration that we're all feeling be represented. I don't think would have pushed people away. I think that would have come through. And I think the problem with him is that he was so clean around the edges that it started to become BS, like the whole beer summit.
That's interesting. There is a process that people have to go through sometimes, and I hadn't really considered the fear that he would be considered as the angry black man, but as you're saying it, I can understand that at least.
I could see Fox having a field day with that.
Yeah. Yes.
But I think it would have rallied his base.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think to some extent, when I was a kid in the suburbs, right, I'm older than you. I remember when the conventional wisdom was Sonny Liston was going to kill then Cassius Clay. And and that was just in my neighborhood, that was just conventional wisdom. And, and I worked for a judge after I came out of law school. I worked for an Illinois Supreme Court judge. And he said his one regret was voting against letting Muhammad Ali fight during the middle of his conscientious objection to the Vietnam War. And if you think about Muhammad Ali is revered now by people of all races, but he wasn't at the start. And what an amazing amount of courage that guy had.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so you wonder. So if I'm hearing you correctly, maybe Obama didn't have that same kind of courage to
I don't
educate
think he did.
people.
And I like him, but I don't think
Yeah.
he did. I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I think, look, that's a whole nother episode, right? I think you could look at that and you could say, well, you stepped up to the plate, but you bunted. And I'm not one to make sports analogies,
Yeah.
but I just did.
Yeah.
You know? And so just to bring that back to Trump, and then I want to bring that back to Huey, because Huey made a comment, let me vaudeville them. Like, watch me vaudeville them.
Yep.
And that's what Trump does so well.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the lowest common denominator. That's why the McDonald's thing worked so well. It was a troll, and it was a coded message to working class blue collar folks.
Yeah, I think politicians use symbolic gestures as well as rhetoric to cement the loyalties of their followers to them. And the trouble is, I think you need to look at what the results are too. I mean, if you're communicating and if you're selling people and if people are buying what you're advocating, and if you then fulfill it and then it has a beneficial effect, you're unlikely to say, well, he used improper or manipulative communication devices. So if you look at, Joe McCarthy said he had a list of communists in the State Department, but he didn't. I mean, there was a mayor of Chicago, William Hale Thompson, who said he was going to punch King George of England in the snout. I mean, he wasn't going to do it, and it wouldn't do any good if he did anyway. You look at George Wallace standing in the door. Well, really?
But Roy Cohn had a woman killed.
Listen, I don't know anything about that, but all I'm saying is that if you're a leader and you mislead the people, where are you leading them to?
No, but didn't Roy Cohn during McCarthyism have somebody sentenced to death? Have a mother sentenced to death?
I don't remember that. Sorry.
And I shouldn't bring it up without having all my homework in front of me. But it's just sort of like not everything is without repercussion, obviously. And these guys go out there and they push out all this info, and this is the poetry that is in your book, because the parallels are bright. But if you tell people what they want to hear, okay, then you can capture them. But once you get in, inevitably you become the new boogeyman. It's inevitable. And I guess this speaks to why change is such a reoccurring theme in our politics. But it's like at a certain point, it's almost never good enough. And I just wonder if Huey Long knew that from the beginning, because it seems like he knew that he was going to be playing people to help people.
Well, he did say it several times that he enjoyed using his enemies against each other. When his enemies had fallings out, he tried to exploit that. And his advice at one point was, whenever you've got nothing on your side, try to create a controversy in the opposition camp. And so he used those kinds of techniques and described them in his own autobiography. I mean, he didn't do it secretly or surreptitiously. He kind of blatantly said, "Look, this is how I'm fighting for to get my program passed." He said his theory of politics was to explain the program over and over and over again until the people got it. And then when he was elected to office, put it through against any and all opposition.
But so let's just say he got elected president, right?
Yeah.
Do you think he could have been a two-term? I mean, do you think that he would have become the boogeyman?
The boogeyman.
And I use that term. It's probably not the right term to use. It's just, again, I'm so fascinated with becoming the thing that one rails against.
Yeah, and it's a great theme that has endless possibilities, right? I mean, because if you accept it, then all political action is useless, and we might as well give up. Because anybody who gets elected to anything is going to become what he was elected to oppose. And therefore, why should we even vote? Why should we even have a democracy? Why should we participate? Why should we care? Why should we listen? So it's hard for me to, accept a point that it leads to apathy or defeatism or withdrawal from the political process. So that's a kind of a deep-seated problem that I would have with accepting the diagnosis. That being said, there's no question that happens a lot. I mean, the politician that goes into office thinking that I'm going to be pure and holy and never do an unethical thing, once they get into having to make hard choices, some of those principles get sacrificed.
It's time to spice up your kitchen with Pampered Chef. Pampered Chef has all the goodies from spatulas, mandolins, and amazing pots and pans, not to mention knives. Plus, don't miss out on small appliances like the deluxe air fryer and coffee maker. Spice up your kitchen today. Go to pamperedchef.com/PWS/Colleen Herman. pamperedchef.com/PWS/Colleen Herman. And with no estate plan, you could be leaving those you love the most with high taxes, probate fees, and an incomplete or divided estate and legal fights and fees. If you live in Florida, contact RK Law for a free consultation to discuss the options you have and the tools available to protect your home, savings, and estate for those you love the most. To get started, send an email to russell@rklawpro.com or call 786-566-2456 to set up your consultation today. That's russell@rklawpro.com. And if you're in the market for a 3D printer, visit flashforge.com. With printers starting at under $300, you can begin your 3D adventures today. Visit flashforge.com. And while you're online, head over to Etsy and the Theme Park Factory. The Theme Park Factory on Etsy is a great way to support this channel. Pick up a Joe Coconut and bring a little bit of the Theme Park Factory to your home.
And one of the issues that I present in the book is, do the ends justify the means, and in what circumstances? And there was, when Huey Long was being impeached, both he and his opponents offered money, jobs, positions to people to vote to impeach him or not to vote to impeach him. And so what are you supposed to do if you're a politician in that circumstance?
Well, you got to play the game to change the game or to survive, whatever your
right
choice is. I mean, some people are just trying to survive. They're not even trying. But guys like this, the ones that I call the sprinters, he had his eye on the presidency from day one. So my thought and I will pose it again to you, is if he would have actually not been assassinated, which is something else I want to unpack, because he was the maker of his own demise, would he have just done it all in one term and said, I don't even need a set? Like, in other words, I'm just going to come in, I'm going to be the tyrant, I'm going to do what I got to do, and I'm going to get it done. And there's no concept of political capital. I'm just going to rule with an iron fist and get out.
Well, I don't think he would have gotten it all done in one term. In fact, I think it might have taken him more than 2 terms to get it done. The Senate only turns over every, only 33% of the senators are elected at any one time. So to develop a strong majority in the Senate, you have to have some staying power with respect to the voters. House of Representatives might be easier to influence. And let's step back for just a moment, and then we'll go back to the Congress. So in Louisiana, he ran for governor in 1924 and lost. He ran for governor again in 1928 and won. He got impeached in 1929. In 1930, to try to recover his standing, he ran for the U.S. Senate and won. And that was only after his entire legislative program failed in the Louisiana legislature in 1930. So he ran for the Senate to try to recover his standing and demonstrate that he had the majority support. He then joined the Senate in 1932, and in 1932, the state of Louisiana was almost out of money, and he had to raise taxes, which was extremely unpopular. In 1933, he got punched in the eye at a ritzy country club after he was overserved, and that accompanied a downturn in his prestige. He lost a New Orleans mayoral election. I mean, he wasn't running, but his candidate lost. And then he lost a Baton Rouge congressional seat that was up for election in April of 1934, so he lost that. And then to recover from that, he had a committee expose the corruption in New Orleans, and he won a spectacular comeback victory in September of 1934. And then in January of 1935, he finally, after Roosevelt had his IRS indict several of his supporters, he finally broke irrevocably with Roosevelt and pursued the strategy of trying to defeat Roosevelt in 1936. And that's when he gave most of his radio speeches in support of the Share Our Wealth plan before he was assassinated in September. So, just to encapsulate this, right, he was preeminent in Louisiana in 1935. He had taken over most of the municipal governments pursuant to state law, but he had taken over most of the municipal governments, and he was preeminent in Louisiana. But think about it. He had been in politics since 1918. Right? It had taken him 17 years through all kinds of defeats, and the opposition just never compromised. And so ultimately they were just defeated entirely, completely. Now, so try to imagine what he would do as president of the United States. I mean, if he had a majority support, the question is, would he have a majority of the senators supporting him? Would he have a majority of Congress people supporting him? How would he implement his program? So I think it would have taken him quite a long time to implement that program, and it would have been compromised and fought over, and the legislation would have had to have been drafted, and the lobbyists would have to be defeated, and so on. So I don't think it was a matter of electing Huey and immediately the Share Our Wealth plan was going to go into effect. I think it would have been a long, drawn-out struggle, just as it was in Louisiana.
And I guess he knew that because talk about somebody that had a long plan, and up until his assassination was executing it. And I do. This is just a side thought that I want to make sure I get out. You know, people are so disarmed by failure in life. And politics is the one industry, and it is an industry, where failure is a prerequisite. I mean, it's a prerequisite in success, period, but it's like necessary in politics to fail. Like nobody expects when you lose that you're going to go home. They're just like, well, what's next? So I just kind of find that fascinating, just because for anybody listening who's thinking of doing anything in life and failure is holding you up, look at politicians.
Well,
I mean, 17 years.
Obama lost to Bobby Rush, didn't he?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And whatever happened to Barack Obama? Now, what's also kind of interesting to me with Huey, and then I do want to talk about his assassination, is leveraging so many different things based off of a vendetta. Like, how often in our country's history have things purely been enacted because of ego? And like how much this man was constantly going after people out of spite didn't necessarily stop him from trying to enact things, but often the motivation isn't the right reasons. Outwardly, it might not matter, but internally, the fact that you're driven by so much spite and hatred when you're supposed to be a man of the people, even with this current president, it's like you just look at that and you go, wow, again, people really are able to separate those things. You know, they don't care, I guess. As long as they're being spoken to, they must not care. I just find it fascinating. You know, the motivation is always something to me that is, it's worth exploring. I get it. You're out there, you're a man of the people, but a lot of his actions are based off of spite. Makes you question the motivation.
Tell me, what do you think? Why do you think Stephen Colbert's show is canceled?
Out of spite.
Yeah.
But now I think that was a deal point. I think that was I can't
prove it. That's what I think.
You think so? Go on. I don't mean that.
I think it was an unstated deal point.
I think it was stated because didn't Trump say there was a side deal?
I think so. But look, I can't prove anything, right? I haven't even seen the deal, so I don't even know what the actual provisions were. So I'm just hypothesizing. But it's the announcement was made very close to the deal being closed, and it was right after he accused his own company of paying a bribe to Trump. And the cover story seems weak, given that he was the most popular late night comedian, had an audience of 2.7 million.
But the motivation doesn't matter. I mean, it is like if we all know the truth.
It's funny that we say on the one hand that defeat might be essential for a politician, and I do remember the talk about the new Nixon after he suffered defeats in 1960 and 1962, and he came back and made a comeback in 1968. And then Churchill was in exile for years before he came back to do his heroic leadership. I suppose you could say the Trump defeat in 2020 gave him 4 years to figure out Project 2025. So you may be right that that defeat is significant, but I also think that people love being with a winner.
But I also think spite and ego is a huge driving factor. I mean, look at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where Trump is sitting in the audience thinking, "I'm going to get you."
Yep. And I think people that want to be with the winner and see that they're with Trump, they appreciate that he vindicates their interests even in spiteful ways. I don't think he's had any blowback from his own supporters about the Stephen Colbert cancellation.
No.
I think we have a real problem in this country with respect to the media being controlled by all these billionaires. I mean, you saw Jeff Bezos bend the knee to Trump, and the Washington Post cowardly refusing to issue an editorial, and then apparently Mr. Ellison is now in charge of CBS. I mean, Musk is in charge of Twitter, or what's left of Twitter, or whatever it is. I mean, it's and you look at the Fox News media and their affiliates. I think they control half the television stations or radio stations in the United States. That's pretty amazing and pretty frightening to me.
You're looking at a consolidation of legacy media under new tech, and the CBS thing. I mean, it's not just Larry Ellison and Skydance and Paramount. It's Larry Ellison and Oracle and TikTok. I mean, Larry Ellison is how is that not going to be a monopoly to have that much? I mean, Rupert Murdoch is another one, but you look at these things and you go, okay, so here's Trump taking care of all of his buddies, and yet his followers generally don't care. He still gets passed off as the working class guy. But he's just sitting there lining the pockets of all of his billionaire buddies who are way more wealthy than he is. But people forgive that for some reason.
Well, Lyndon Johnson had a remark where he said, if you can convince the poorest white fellow that he's better than the richest black man, he will let you pick his own pocket for your advancement.
Yeah, well, Huey Long said something similar in the book. He didn't say it in the book. You wrote it, but there's something in there he said about that too, but it just goes back to playing people. And yeah, you may be playing them for your own self-interest, but as long as they feel like they're getting what they need, they forgive so much. And I guess that's the game of politics. I don't know. I to go back to your question about how do we fix it, looking at the Bernies and the Trumps and all that, I say we just need to. And again, this is going to take tyranny, right? Otherwise, this will never happen. But we need somebody in there that just says, you know what, EO, I'm wiping out all of Congress, new election. But that takes tyranny.
Yeah, you're a revolutionary if you're saying that.
Why not? What's left? What's left? But it would take a Huey Long type to come in there and go, this is what we're going to do. Like, were EOs even a thing back then? What would have been the modern day equivalent back then of an EO?
Damned if I know.
Right? Yeah. So it would have been like that, but that would have been the move. He comes in there, does whatever the hell he wants. He rules with an iron fist and he gets out. It's only a dictator to the people that don't like what you're doing at that point.
Well, look, the problem is, what is a dictator and what is a tyrant, right? I mean, you can... one of the books about Huey said they thought he was a dictator, and I'm reading along, and he says he vindicated the right of a strong man to lead. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, Huey convinced the people to elect him. He convinced the legislature to adopt the laws that he wanted, and that makes him a dictator? I mean, what if he hadn't been able to convince the legislature to adopt his program? He would have been a failure. So
that makes me think
you have a Congress that you have to dominate. Even if you dominate that Congress, it exists. And the very fact of domination of that Congress shows that it's an institution that should survive, it seems to me.
It's just funny. You just reminded me of one of the chapter titles. It's one of your strikes. The opposition strikes back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, wait a second. Who, in that analogy, who's the empire and who's the rebellion? That goes back to your sphere.
Yeah.
And it changes. I mean, would Huey Long be a Democrat or a Republican today? He would probably be a Republican.
Well, maybe in Louisiana he would. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, so was his program hard to digest. One of the interesting things about Huey to me was that he's been called a socialist more times than I can count. And his tax plan to say that he's going to tax the rich people 100% over a certain level certainly seems radical, and what is radical? Nobody else has proposed it. So, but if you look at what that would do, it would actually enhance competition. You know, if everybody had the right to a college education, then poor kids could compete more effectively with the sons and daughters of rich kids. So that enhances competition. If every family has a minimum homestead and income, then they're all going to have food, clothes, shelter, and so on, and they're going to be able to compete more effectively. If you're talking about taxing at 100% wealth over a certain level, seems draconian. But if that gives everybody else a chance, then maybe it rejuvenates the system. You know, you have mandatory retirement ages. What, somebody at 65 is all of a sudden incompetent the moment he turns 65? I mean, he's probably as competent as he was when he was 64, and he's probably as competent as he would have been at 66. But we say mandatory retirement, get out, right? You look at the National Football League. They want competition. They want competition among those football teams. What do? They have a salary cap. And they give the worst football team the best draft pick through all the rounds of the draft. Those guys are billionaires or whatnot, but they know how to design a system for competition when it's in their interest to do so. And they have these kinds of caps and minimums and aid to the people who have failed thus far to design their system. So if you're looking at what Huey proposed, a tax of 100% over a certain level and a minimum income and homestead, free college educations or vocational training for those who could do the actual work, you wouldn't have the federal government deciding what housing to build or where to build it. Right, all those decisions would be gone. It would be private individuals with their income able to afford whatever housing they chose to afford and getting the education that they wanted. So it's actually a weird combination of drastic action, but trying to fulfill what should be the essence of capitalism, which is competition, but making it a fair game, equal opportunity. Everybody gets a chance at college or vocational training. Everybody gets adequate shelter, and everybody gets a chance to compete. I think it's a very interesting system to consider.
That's why party politics is such a ruse, because at the end of the day, that we go right back to that horseshoe, right? Most people want the same things. In fact, I would go as far as to say all people want the same things. I don't know of anybody that really doesn't want to be, economically viable, healthy, be able to live a fulfilling life, provide for their family, leave the world in a better place for their kids and their children's children. And it's just a matter of how we get there. But it's through the lens of party politics that people get distracted from the core goals. Well, so what you're talking about there is the ultimate progressive.
But progressives at the time, a lot of them did not agree with Huey because they wanted a planned economy, which is similar to socialism or the state capitalistic system that Italy had at the time under Mussolini. And so
they did about universal health care.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think the problem is and I was thinking of this earlier as we were chatting, is it's the bumper sticker slogans, which today I would say has been replaced with Twitter.
Yes.
Right? Twitter's the modern day bumper sticker.
Sure.
And people don't get past it, right? It's the headline. They don't get past the headline.
Yeah.
So they never get to the substance. And everything gets judged off of that one line, that one tweet, that slogan.
Yeah.
And it's like defund the police. Didn't even mean what people thought it meant.
It has to be the stupidest campaign's reform slogan of all time, don't you think?
Right. Yeah. That sounds like legalized murder was the way it was being sold.
Yep.
So it's
and it's terrible. I saw a speech by the head of the Fraternal Order of Police in Chicago. This was several years ago, but it might still be on the website for the City Club of Chicago. And he said the usual things in favor of the police and so on. So I'm not saying there was a total congruent, but he said that if you look at where the crime was in Chicago and then look at where the unemployment was in Chicago, it's the same places. If you look at where the education system in Chicago is deficient and where the crime is high in Chicago, it's the same places. He said, you're asking police to solve a social problem. And isn't that, if you scrape under the defund the police slogan, isn't that what those people were saying?
Yeah, but rebudget the police doesn't sound sexy.
No, but helping the police solve social problems might be.
Still doesn't sound nice. At least we're still talking about defund the police.
But sexy and turning people off is kind of contrary to what you're trying to do, right?
That's a whole other hour. But look, the themes in this book, again, and I really didn't want to dive right into the Trump parallels, but it's almost impossible to avoid. And I do want to touch on his assassination, but I have to say, and I said this on a podcast the other day with a gentleman, I don't think that Trump is a product of us. I think that we as a people have caught up.
What do you mean by that?
He was in our culture from day one. And with the spread of social media, the spread of information too fast, our standards have been lowered. Trump used to say really shocking things on the Howard Stern show back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. People also used to ask him if he would consider running for president, but nobody ever thought about what he was saying in one environment and weighing it against that ask. So it got to a point where we became a troll culture. We became a hate-filled culture where this idea of faux masculinity, which is what Trump represents, right? Because he wishes he was a strong man. He is not, right? So I think that he was there all along. And we just caught up to where his level of brashness was openly accepted, and people had enough where they were just like, I'll take whatever this man says because I know who he is.
Well, that's interesting. I just read a book about revolution and protest. I'm blanking on the name of the author of the book. I met her at an Authors Guild function. And, we've had protests. We've had police beating up union members and minority groups almost from the beginning of this country. So I don't know whether we've caught up. It may be the first time that someone this malevolent it has become president of the United States. So in that sense, maybe somebody's caught up to somebody. But you've always had people like Joe McCarthy or George Wallace or other, some of those Southern politicians, were just beyond the pale in terms of what they stated it and how they said it. It was just like you read it now and you think, what was happening? And so you could be right on that, but it's a very hard thing to measure over time, at least to me.
I go back to his consistency. That this man has been the same from day one. And when you are doing retail politics, that's priceless. So it seems to be the very thing that Huey Long grasped before so many other people, and so many people missed that after him.
So what you're saying basically is that Trump waited. He articulated his views and then waited till there was adequate sentiment for him to capitalize on those views, and then made his move because he talked.
Whether it was conscious or not, I think it's an alignment of moments. Yeah.
I think every politician has to have their alignment of moments. if you want to play the alternate history game, just think if Hillary Clinton had voted against the Iraq War, Barack Obama never would have defeated her in those primaries, in my opinion, because that was the issue that gave him the wedge to defeat her in the primaries. And if she had been nominated in 2008, I think she would have won, because that was the time we had the greatest recession since the Great Depression. And so I think she would have defeated John McCain. And if you assume she would have been president for 2 terms, Barack Obama would have probably been president in 2016 as her successor.
Maybe, or maybe not, because after 8 years of that, people want change because the pendulum swings. It's inevitable.
Could be. But although Franklin Roosevelt won 4 times, and then Harry Truman won once after that.
Well, and I keep saying I want to get to Huey Long's assassination, but if you look at the upcoming midterms,
yeah,
history, going off of just history, just purely history, the Democrats are destined to win the midterm. It's theirs to lose. Well, so Trump becomes the establishment, and now there's enough of a voter population to say, that was enough of you.
Well, I think Trump's brought a lot of that on himself, don't you think?
Yes, but I think when you're talking about Clark County and Bucks County, those people are always going to vote change, especially when it's the economy stupid.
You know, it's funny. In June or July of 2016, I went to this Churchill Society dinner in Philadelphia. And I sat next to a Republican, I can't remember his name, who was in charge of like 5 counties in Pennsylvania. And, of course, it was Trump versus Hillary at that time. He told me he thought Trump was going to go down to overwhelming defeat, and it was going to hurt the Republican Party for decades. I mean, so I think things can change in an instant. I think this Epstein thing for Trump, I think the waffling on tariffs, I think if he does impose tariffs and they increase prices, I think Democrats are going to have a lot of ammunition in the midterms. And it's not necessarily related to just an inchoate kind of desire for change. It's going to be, I don't like masked vigilantes rounding people up off the streets when they include American citizens. I don't like the price of food going up. I don't like not knowing what the hell's going on from one day to the next. I don't like bombing Iran. You know, where's the one day peace in Ukraine that you promised? You know, I mean, they're going to have a lot of things to talk about that are on a rational basis. Could undergird a campaign as opposed to just, well, we want to change. We're sick of you.
But none of those things are what swing counties decide elections on. At least not midterms. Maybe there's room for that just because of turnout. But general elections, it's always going to be the economy. So we'll see what happens. I think, just to touch on the Epstein thing briefly, I think this is a prime example of the Democrats getting it all wrong again. They should have sat back quietly, but as soon as they start piling on, everybody that was on Trump's base that was looking at him and going, wait, what happened? Why aren't you releasing these? As soon as the Democrats pile on, they go, whoa, it's a conspiracy. As soon as this Wall Street Journal thing came out or whatever it was, whoa, it's a conspiracy. So I think sometimes, even when everything is lined up for them, the Democrats fail to knock it down.
But so if you were advising a Democratic candidate, someone who wanted to run for president the next time, what would you advise them to do now?
Well, in this particular moment with the Epstein thing, I would sit quietly and I might start talking about the real things that people care about, and might start going back to Huey, might start building out that agenda well before I ever worry about office. And I think the problem is most of these guys are always worried about the next office. I'd be focused on building an actual agenda that anybody could run off of and not make it all about me. And I would also not use money, but that's just me. But I'm a disruptor. I think we got to break the money out of that's why I think Deja Fox is so compelling.
Interesting. I was interested in the social movement theory and the revolution literature that I read, and which I kind of go through in chapter 7 of the book, where you have issue framing mobilization, and you're not afraid of confrontation. You have to recognize a grievance and then diagnose a solution that would solve that grievance. And then you have to mobilize. And then you have to be unafraid to confront your opposition.
All that before governing.
Yes. Isn't that something?
Because everything you just said there is exhausting.
Yes. And that's why, Huey's tremendous fund of energy perhaps led him implement that kind of thing. So what I hear you saying is something that I kind of agree with, if I'm understanding you correctly, which is that the Democrats, if they were going to oppose Trump, need to establish an agenda, which is what are the grievances and what is your issue frame to solve those grievances, and then make sure that proposal that you have is impervious to criticism, or will only be criticized by people you'll never get anyway, like the billionaires, let's say.
And it has to be bigger than Trump, because when Trump is no longer on the ticket, it's the same gripe I have with MAGA. Well, now you're getting your way. How are you going to run Making America Great Again? That's reached its limit if you've truly gotten your way.
That's right.
So it goes back to that same idea of becoming the thing that you.
Yeah, well, I think in that context, you're basically saying once you implement your program and life stays the same, then you're the establishment, and then some new change has to be proposed or established. And if you look at Reagan's campaign in 1980, he ran on the campaign of cutting taxes, and they cut taxes in 1980, and basically in 1984 he just ran. I'm the incumbent, let's keep it going. You know what I mean?
Right. Just extend what. So, but that's kind of what, Biden was like, I'm going to be a transitional candidate. And that would have been, if he would have actually honored that, would that not have been the first time that somebody said, I'm bowing out for the betterment of the people and not for my own interest?
Yeah, I think in retrospect, a couple of things. Number one, he would have, if he wanted Harris to be his successor, he should have resigned not just as a candidate, but as the president, you say a year beforehand, to give her a chance to show what she could do, or to give someone else a chance to challenge her in the primaries.
Right.
So I definitely think that's the case. And I also think that while Biden's staffers weren't necessarily disloyal to him, I think it's extremely unusual to have a debate scheduled before the nominating convention. And I think that Biden's staffers would have been happy if he had performed well at that debate, but they scheduled that debate before the convention so that if he failed and fell on his face, they could have time to select a new candidate. So
or they did it purposely.
That's what I think. I think they scheduled that purposely.
Yeah. No, but I mean, knowing that he was going to fail.
Well,
not if.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I think that's a slight difference. Sure. I don't think they were so disloyal that they knew he was going to fail, but maybe they did. But I think it's more
the Democrat establishment. You see the same thing with David Hogg. You're seeing it now with Cuomo. The establishment lines up. Period. They line up.
There's no question that occurs, and that's what defeated Bernie Sanders in the primaries. No question about that.
And now, if he was really savvy, and I think he's more hot air than savvy, he would have leveraged that for another cycle and ran as the guy the establishment took out and rode that to victory.
I think, again, using a worm's eye view of Bernie Sanders and comparing him to Huey, Sanders lost the nomination in North and South Carolina among black delegates, right, in 2016. And then in 2020, he lost the nomination to Biden in the same place. And so when Huey lost the governorship in 1924, he didn't make a strong enough showing in southern Louisiana with a lot of Catholic voters or in the city of New Orleans. And so he took steps in those intervening 4 years to obtain additional support in the Catholic areas of southern Louisiana and to try to get more support in the city of New Orleans. His efforts in New Orleans didn't really bear fruit, but his efforts in southern Louisiana with the Catholic voters bore tremendous fruit, and he had a huge victory in 1928. But
that wasn't when he blamed the rain, was it?
The 1924 election, he blamed the rain.
I love that.
You bet. And how can you say that Trump didn't copy Huey when he said he actually won the 2020 election?
Well, yeah. So who read it? Because Trump did it. I mean, who's studying this guy? Maybe how far back does it go?
Maybe Steve Bannon.
But maybe this goes back to Roger Stone, and maybe this goes back to Roy Cohn.
Good.
Because Trump is obviously, been built up by men much smarter and much more sinister than he. He is a vessel.
That's the thing. People, some people have asked me who was smarter, Trump or Huey, and I have to say Huey, because Huey didn't need a Project 2025 to tell him what to do.
He didn't need Twitter.
Yeah.
I mean, look at what this man did. We'll talk about retail politics. I mean, just thinking about it, and I know it's hard for a lot of people to like think about a world where you don't have all of this media. Forget the internet.
Right.
I'm talking legacy media.
Right.
You're talking about this is a time when people were campaigning on the advent of paved roadways. Okay. And for him to be stumping the way that goes back to the Sprint comment. It's almost like a man like this, his life was destined to be cut short. Guys like this, they burn the candle at both ends. And we're not just talking politics, in life. I could rattle off so many people that come to mind, Tupac, Jim Henson, Walt Disney, so there's a type of man. And so to bring that to the assassination,
he said that quote. He quoted that poetry in the Hattie Caraway campaign. I burn the candle at both ends. It will not last the night.
That's probably kicking around in my head.
Yeah.
Do you think that he was the maker of his own demise?
No. I think, the doctor who shot him bears individual responsibility for his decision to do that.
But it was political.
He was gerrymandering his father-in-law, and he had fired, I think, a relative who was a principal of a school. So he had that kind of motive, but most people don't think that was the motive. They think that he looked at himself as a political martyr. He had been in Europe studying medicine, and he had observed some of the fascist leaders in Europe at the time, and that he just became unbalanced, thinking that Huey was a similar type of dictator. He had the largest funeral for an assassin in United States history. Over 2,000 people went to his funeral, and I saw there were a lot of people plotting to kill Huey. One of the plotters told the prior biographer of Huey, T. Harry Williams, he said, Huey was a dictator just like the Kennedys. And that comment really is burned in my brain. I mean, because what kind of person thinks that Kennedys were a dictator and that Huey was? How do you get to that point?
But you don't see that. I mean, I could see where Joseph Kennedy is a bootlegger. I mean, and being all mobbed up, I could certainly see where there's a lot of power consolidated there. I don't know if dictator is a strong word.
Yeah, I think that there's no question that Huey's opposition was frustrated with their inability to defeat him. He was always one step ahead, and they could never ultimately defeat him. They thought they had him on the ropes a few times, but they could never ultimately defeat him. He always came back stronger and better. So I think there was a rumor that he was going to smear his wife's family with being part black. There was a rumor that he was just upset with European fascists and thought Huey was in that mold. And some people thought that the political motive of the gerrymander of his father-in-law was the reason. But other evidence is that the father-in-law had taken that matter lightly. They were joking about it at the dinner table. They didn't need the job. He didn't need to be a judge, so it wasn't taken that seriously. And most people say that Huey did not intend to smear his wife's family as being part black. He was preparing to run for president. He had black members of the Share Our Wealth societies in the North. He knew he needed black voters in the North. He had apologized to a black newspaper for using the N-word and said he'd be more tactful in the future. And that was written about in a Louisiana paper as a disgraceful that he would apologize to a black man.
Wow.
for that purpose. I mean, it was just crazy. I mean, it's hard to imagine today, but there it was. But I don't think he didn't intend to use that remark. But maybe somebody told him he was going to or something, and he just acted on that fear. So we don't really know the motive.
Did you say 2,000 people showed up to the assassin's funeral?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think that says?
I think they viewed him as a political martyr. I think they thought that he was motivated by his fear that Huey was a tyrant.
That's another parallel in our culture. It makes me think of this whole Luigi Mangione thing.
Yeah.
Because our culture loves to celebrate martyrs.
Yeah. And one of the, some of the people that attended the assassin's funeral included the former governor of Louisiana and some of the district attorneys from some of the parishes. So look, Louisiana politics had a significant amount of violence. They had a very high homicide rate and so on. If you call somebody a son of a bitch, you were likely to get shot. If you insulted somebody's wife, you were likely to get shot. I mean, it was rough and tumble there, and so it's hard to conceptualize a culture that extreme, but it's there.
The local politics is so dirty. It's dirtier than national politics.
Well, I can't say anything being from Illinois. We had, first a Republican.
You can say a lot.
We had a Republican governor and then a Democratic governor, and they both went to jail. So,
do you think Huey Long's assassination was planned?
Well, I don't think so. But there were people planning to assassinate him. So
it was inevitable.
It was inevitable that he would get shot. I mean, I think the operation on him was botched and that he could have been saved if the operation had been successful.
Well, so I'm just going to ask you the same question again. Do you think he was the maker of his own demise? Because it was his hubris that kept bringing people out against him. I mean, he definitely used an iron fist to get as far as he got.
Yeah, there was one congressman who was quoted in the newspaper as saying that Huey got what was coming to him, which I thought is a terrible comment for any congressman to make or any person to make, really. So I think that the person who shot him bears individual responsibility for making that choice, and I don't think I don't think Huey prompted that. I think they may have believed that Huey prompted it or was responsible for it, but he was elected. He was elected over and over and over again. I mean, why not? His constitutional amendments always got these huge majorities, even larger than the majorities that he carried for himself in his own personal campaigns. Why didn't his opposition wake up and smell the coffee? His programs were popular. Why were you fighting him? What is the problem?
It's a threat to a lot of people's pocketbook.
And that's, there's a great, these are master's or PhD thesis written by a professor I can't remember, at Tulane, called Alex McManus. And his thesis is titled Sharing the Hate. And it's a play on Huey's Sharing the Wealth program, but it discusses the fact that the opposition to Huey was basically hypocritical efforts that objected to destroying the subsidies that they'd previously enjoyed from the state government.
And it's just a reminder that this level of vitriol has always been in our politics.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just up to the messenger to leverage it. And just to kind of pull it back to Trump, he's been very effective, whether you like it or not, as a messenger at leveraging that vitriolic underbelly. I mean, he brought it to the surface, and it was festering, but it was always there. And this book is a absolute. I was going to use the wrong phrase, but it's a blatant reminder that in many ways it's us.
Oh, look, I think if you want to understand Trump, you do well to read the book that I wrote. And
I concur.
And
but also to understand us as a people and our expectations of leadership and how we always are willing to turn a blind eye as long as we feel like we're getting whatever it is that we need.
Yeah, I think.
And then,
I mean, it's the old thing, right? Constant vigilance. I mean, the problem, if you look at the United States, we've never perfectly implemented the Declaration of Independence, the ideals of that. I mean, and even politicians we typically admire, like Franklin Roosevelt, put Japanese Americans in a concentration camp.
Right.
I mean, please. And the Supreme Court approved it.
Well, and the long-term effects of that, most people never digested,
Right.
which was a total diaspora, right? Is that the right word to use? When they brought everybody out of the camps, they put a lot of Japanese Americans up in Illinois, right?
I don't know.
I believe.
I haven't followed that, but I just think that the idea that we put people in concentration camps and the Supreme Court approved it. You know, we say, well, we've got three branches of government as checks and balances against each other. Look at the Jim Crow legislation. That's a majoritarian tyranny, right?
But we didn't. I'm just going back to the Japanese internment camps because I pre-pandemic or during the pandemic, I worked on a bunch of virtual. None of these old folks could go do pilgrimages, so we did virtual pilgrimages.
Wow.
Because with COVID, you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So I don't have all the information in front of me, but what I do know is how much land was stolen from Japanese Americans, okay, legally, and I used quotes if you're listening. So not only were they interred, but then when they were brought out of these internment camps, they were taken to other parts of the country and forced to rebuild from scratch and lost the very land that they once had. And again, all done on the up and up.
Yeah.
Through people that history will say were good leaders.
Yeah. And I suppose then if people start talking about it, we'll have laws outlawing the teaching of that.
Correct.
So,
well, that's American exceptionalism, right? And then how do you view American exceptionalism?
Yeah. I mean, it's a problem. But look, we've gone through a lot. We have, I mean, if you look at race relations in the 60s, when I lived in Virginia, compared to race relations now, I mean, there have been significant improvements made. If you look at the union members who were beaten by police, you know, back in the 10s and 1920s and so on, I mean, we have unions enshrined in our political process now. So I'm generally speaking, I'm trying to be optimistic about that these current disturbances will ultimately, you know, be rectified, and as you say, the pendulum might return to a more Christian kind of society where we treat our neighbors as we wanted to be treated.
Well, there's an ebb and a flow, and I think that's what the book is reminding me, is that some of the things that we are experiencing today, we've been there before. It doesn't excuse them, but it's a reminder that if this truly is like the wave, the ebb and the flow, we ride this wave. But if we don't have a plan, then we're just going to be treading water the whole time. And that's my concern with the Democrats, is staying above water is not enough.
Right.
You have to have a plan. And I'm tired of all the echo chambers and all the anti-Trump stuff, not because I don't agree with it, but how many more times do I need to see the same 6 people going on the podcasts of each other over and over again talking about Trump?
Right.
Like, let's talk about building a future.
Right. Every little thing. I talked to one voter, and it was a Republican at the time that Trump was opposed in the Republican primaries this time, maybe by Haley. And this fellow said to me, he said, look, we all know what Trump is, but I thought that Haley didn't spend enough time talking about what she was going to do. She just criticized Trump, and I didn't see a reason to vote for her. I didn't know what she was planning to do. Now, I don't know if that's a fair criticism or not, but I think to your point about the Democrats, I think that if Trump is destroyed, right, if Fox News finally decides that they've had enough of him and they destroy him, then when a Democrat rises, that Trump will train their fire on the Democrat, and whoever it is, and they will try to destroy that Democrat. And then whoever Trump's successor is will win on the Republican side, unless the Democrat is successful in using the media to establish a definite program that reflects the grievances we have and is something that will work.
You said Haley. You could have said Harris. It still would have held water.
Maybe.
Truly. I'll end with this. As we think, in terms of being optimistic for the future, I see what's going on right now with this whole Epstein thing. And as much as I don't like Trump, I have more concern for what happens if J.D. Vance becomes president and Peter Thiel and all of the tech bros consolidating behind a leader that actually has full use of his cognitive function. So the grass isn't always greener. And that's not an endorsement of anything Trump is doing. But I think that sometimes it might be easier to go, let's just ride this wave, like I'm saying, and then build out a larger plan for the future. And because again, if you said Fox News, but it's truly
broader than
it's
that.
the tech bros. If the oligarchy chooses that we've had enough of Trump and it's time for Vance to be president, drop the Epstein stuff, we're going to be way worse off than we are today.
Yes, I think that. I think the key point is that if there's going to be an opponent to Trump, they need to establish what their plan is, and it has to reflect the grievances of the people who have in the past voted for Trump.
Right. And it can't vilify them. And honestly, it shouldn't have the word Trump in the plan at all.
Right. I think that's true.
So, Thomas E. Patterson, the book is American Populist, Huey Long of Louisiana. Thank you for your time. I'm sure we went longer than you expected. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Thanks for having me on, and I enjoyed the conversation too. So if you want to have me back sometime, go ahead.
I would love to. Absolutely. And likewise, anytime you're doing something, I'm always game.
All right.
The book is available everywhere, correct?
Yes.
All right. So for those of you who are raging against Jeff Bezos, you don't have to get it on Amazon.
That's right. Barnes & Noble has it too.
Poor Amazon making jobs. That's not good enough, right?
Right.
Take care, sir. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.